Dwight Fairfield, the nervous leader. The first survivor we're going to be looking at is Dwight, who might also be considered the face of the survivors for the series. Dwight has always been a scrawny, dorky kid, and despite his efforts, has never been able to gain the popularity that he desired. To make matters worse, he wasn't particularly good at sports, and his grades were average at best. One day, he and his co-workers at Dwight's dead-end job went into the woods as a part of a team-building exercise. While out there, Dwight's boss broke out some of his homemade moonshine. Dwight only remembered taking the first sip before waking up alone the next morning. Feeling like a laughingstock, Dwight tried to find his way out of the woods on his own, but unfortunately, he was never heard from again. Despite his looks, Dwight has the mentality of a true survivor and is willing to do whatever it takes to escape. Like all survivors, Dwight has perks that reflect his unique personality. Dwight's perks all reflect his role as the de facto group leader, and are primarily focused on getting survivors to work better as a team. His first perk is Bond. Bond allows Dwight to see other characters' auras if they are within a certain distance of him. This can allow him to find other survivors more easily, and allows them to work together to get generators up and running. His second perk is Prove Thyself. Dwight feels pressured by others and will feel the need to prove himself. This will increase the speed he performs any action when there are other survivors within an 8-meter radius of him. Dwight's last unique perk is Leader. Despite never having had experience leading others, Dwight is a natural, and his aptitude at encouraging others will give them a speed boost at working towards their different objectives if they are within an 8-meter radius of him. Despite being stuck in a horrifying situation, Dwight has found his strength when it comes to facing off against the killers that hunt him. His ability to lead and desire to help others escape fuel his hope against the entity's overwhelming presence. Claudette Morel, the studious botanist. From an early age, Claudette has had a very scientific mind, which opened many doors for her in life, including a full-fledged scholarship. Taking this chance, she decided to leave Montreal despite her timid and introverted nature, and set off to start her life in earnest. Due to her shyness, the majority of Claudette's time was spent online and in chat rooms, teaching others botany tips and tricks, while avoiding face-to-face interaction. One day after a bus ride back from the city, she became lost while trying to walk through the woods, and unfortunately never managed to find her way back out. It wasn't until after a week or so of her no longer posting online that people finally began to wonder what had happened to her. Claudette's unique skills allow her to act as the healer of the group as she pulls from her scientific and past botany knowledge, and combines it with the power taken from the entity. Her first skill is Empathy. Empathy allows her to see injured survivors' auras within a certain distance until it reaches its highest rank, after which it obtains an infinite range and will allow her to see an injured survivor no matter how far away they are from her. This can allow her to track down and heal injured survivors, or avoid situations where a survivor is being chased by a killer. Her second perk is Botany Knowledge. Botany allows Claudette to utilize plants found in the entity's woods to help heal herself or others. When doing any healing action while botany is equipped, the healing action is sped up by a percentage. Claudette's third ability is Self-Care. Self-care is arguably considered the most useful skill in Dead by Daylight. Claudette's knowledge of medicine and anatomy allows her to heal herself when injured without relying on another survivor, though at a reduced healing speed. Self-heal has the added positive effect of increasing the speed that she can heal when she is using a medkit. Alright, I need to go off on an aside here for a moment, and the reason for that is because it has been announced that self-care as well as a few other skills will be changed in an upcoming patch. Now these ideas haven't been finalized, but we have some idea of what the changes are going to be like. The current idea for the upcoming change to self-care is that if you are trying to heal yourself and are interrupted for any reason, you will have to start the healing process all over again. However, if you are healed from any other source, such as a medkit or another survivor, the process from those sources will remain, but any progress made from self-care on its own will need to be done over again. Despite her now being trapped in the entity's garden, Claudette finds hope in the darkness. She was never good in social situations and found interactions to be unnatural and forced. Here she is useful, and her skills and botany knowledge can help save a life even as the endless despair threatens to consume her. Meg Thomas, the energetic athlete. Meg has always been a force to be reckoned with. Whether this was due to her mother's style of parenting or her absentee father figure who left when she was still an infant, Meg could be defined as being a troubled teen. Luckily, an athletics coach managed to encourage her to channel her misspent energy into the racetrack. She managed to motivate herself and become the star of the track and field team, earning her an athletics scholarship. Sadly, when her mother fell ill, Meg gave up her chance at college to care for her. She never gave up running though, and would often take long runs through the nearby woods to help clear her head. After departing into the woods one day, Meg never returned, and no body was ever found. Meg's time as an athlete has allowed her to pull her own brand of energy from the entity. Her first perk is Quick and Quiet. The sound made when vaulting over obstacles and jumping quickly out of lockers is minimized. However, if another vault or jump is made within the perk's cooldown time, it will alert the killer like normal. Her second perk is Adrenaline. Adrenaline causes Meg to immediately heal one health state and begins sprinting at 150% of her normal speed once the exit gates are powered. If this happens while she's stuck in the dream realm after being placed there by the nightmare, she will also wake up. If Meg is on the hook when the gates have been powered, she will gain her benefits after she has been taken off the hook. After Adrenaline has been used, Meg will go into a state of exhaustion. Adrenaline, however, ignores exhaustion if Meg is already suffering from the effect. Meg's third perk is Sprint Burst. When beginning to run, Meg will start sprinting at 150% of her normal speed. After Sprint Burst has been activated, Meg will become exhausted, preventing her from reusing Sprint Burst or any other abilities that exhaustion would prevent from being used for a short duration. Exhaustion is another aspect of the game that will be changed soon. Originally, after you use a perk that causes exhaustion, a timer will begin. How long exhaustion is in effect varied depending on the perk and its tier. In an upcoming patch, the exhaustion timer will freeze if a character is currently running, making it harder for the perk to become active multiple times while being chased by a killer. Meg now runs through the realm of the entity, and in doing so understands that speed and coming in first isn't always your main goal, as sometimes reaching the finish line last is perfectly acceptable, as long as you're still breathing at the end. Jake Park, the solitary survivor. Jake always felt pressured when growing up as the son of a wealthy CEO. When his brother graduated with honors from Yale, the pressure on Jake intensified. He had never felt like the academic type, and was never able to make his father understand his rejection of the expensive education that he was offering. Finally, he snapped, and dropped out of school entirely to live on his own in seclusion at the edge of the nearby woods. While he never spoke to his father again, his mother would check on him occasionally. It was she who noticed when he went missing. It was she who called the police. And it was she who pleaded for help after the search was called off, as Jake was considered just another casualty of the woods. After living on his own for so long, Jake has learned what it takes to rough it on your own. These are skills that have allowed him to pull his own unique perks from the entity. Jake's first perk is Iron Will. Iron Will allows Jake to enter a meditative state that will stop him from grunting in pain. At lower ranks, he will only remain silent if standing still, but at the highest tier of his perk, he will remain silent at all times. Jake's second perk is Calm Spirit. Sensing Jake's animal-like spirit allows Jake to move around the procedural without disturbing the crows that act as the entity's agents. Calm Spirit is not effective though if Jake physically touches the crows. Calm Spirit is another perk that's going to have a change to it. In this change, Calm Spirit isn't only going to affect the woodland creatures. Calm Spirit will also make the user calm when dealing with various situations, making them immune to screaming in these certain circumstances. This could possibly include when being placed on hooks, and being driven to madness by the doctor. Jake's third perk is Saboteur. Learning to work without tools. Saboteur allows Jake to sabotage hooks, as well as certain traps in procedural without a toolbox. If Jake has a toolbox in his possession, Saboteur will increase the toolbox's effectiveness when sabotaging. Jake is a living dichotomy. part wealthy elite and part feral animal. Remove the killers from the entity's realm and Jake would feel right at home, removed from technology and civilization. Using his honed survival skills, Jake is willing to do anything to ensure his own survival, as he knows that before you can do anything else, you must survive. Nia Carlson, the urban artist. Nia grew up in the small town of Hjo, Sweden. She had a relatively happy childhood even though her mom and dad were often working. In her earlier years, she spent her time having fun with her friends. However, in her early teens, she learned that her parents would have the opportunity to move to the United States as part of their job. As this opportunity to move to the US became a reality, she started acting out, making her parents believe that she lacked the thing that made everybody else quote-unquote normal. Her oblivious parents didn't really pick up on this as a reaction to the move, and thus Nia was forced to leave her friends and old life behind. In reaction, Nia, now 16, shied away from what her parents considered normal activities, and instead took refuge in skate parks, finding a new life and becoming a tagger, and a bit of a troublemaker. Her tag, Matchsticks, was often seen all over her new hometown, and Nia especially made a sport out of tagging government buildings. Nia was now fully immersed in this culture, dyeing her hair and cutting it the way she liked. One day, she may have gone too far, when her friends dared her to tag the old and abandoned Crotus Pren Asylum. Nia bravely, and foolishly, accepted their dare and entered the asylum, but never came back out. Nia's parents at this point had become numb to Nia disappearing for days on end, and didn't even bother reaching out to the police when she never came back home. Just like the other survivors before her, Nia must try to escape this hellish world of the entity, as well as the killers that share in her torment. In the procedurals, she is nimble and almost cat-like, being able to evade deadly dangers. Years on skateboards has proven worthy training, and keeping her head down to avoid the fuzz has allowed her a unique way to avoid her pursuers. The main question that remains is, will her own willpower sustain her until she finds a solution that allows her to escape for good? Nia's first perk is Balanced Landing. Nia has learned how to use her cat-like reflexes to her advantage when falling from long distances. Upon landing from a drop from a certain height, Nia will start sprinting at 150% of her normal speed for up to 3 seconds. Afterwards, she will be put in the exhaustion state until she can regain her breath. Nia's second perk is Urban Evasion. Nia's years of evading the cops is now put to good use, as crouching past them has taught her a thing or two about stealth. With this ability, the speed that Nia moves at while crouching is greatly increased, being equal to her regular movement speed at max rank. Nia's third perk is Streetwise. Spending nights out on the street has taught Nia how to get the most out of what she has. Whenever Nia is using an item, Streetwise reduces the consumption rate of the item up to 15%. If an ally is using an item within an 8-meter radius of Nia, they share this reduced consumption rate. Nia now uses her stealth and agility to avoid her pursuers when participating in the entity's twisted game, but only time will tell if she ever manages to reach the world she left behind. Ace Visconti, the Lucky Gambler. Ace Visconti is considered to be one charming guy. With his sharp Italian looks, gray streaked hair, and silver tongue, he could pass for an aging 50s movie star. It has been assumed that he has broken his share of hearts throughout his life, but his heart has always belonged to the cards. In order to raise himself from his roots as a poor boy in Argentina, he gambled, scammed, seduced, and smooth-talked his way into a life of luxury as a high roller in the land of opportunity. Despite money always having a way of slipping through his fingers, Ace always figured he could win more, as he always considered himself lucky. His luck, however, had a tendency to be both good and bad, and he never managed to fulfill that ambition. Eventually, he racked up too many debts with the wrong kind of people, almost ensuring that his luck would have run out. When these groups finally came to collect, Ace was nowhere to be found, having disappeared without a trace. No one knew who tipped him off or where he fled to, but anyone who knew Ace Visconti can agree on one thing: he will survive against all odds. It's not certain if his fall into the entity's realm was his own doing, or how he entered the realm in the first place. However, Ace now goes through every challenge set before him with a wink and a smile, his eerie confidence igniting a spark of hope in his allies, one that his true enemies will do anything to snuff out. Ace's first perk is Open-Handed. Ace's mere presence and attention to detail strengthens himself and his allies, increasing their aura reading abilities. At max rank, it can increase various aura perks' range by a maximum of 8 meters. Ace's second perk is Up the Ante. Ace knows that the more teammates he has, the luckier he will be. For each other survivor still alive in the procedural, Ace and the other survivors will get a bonus percentage added to their luck, making it easier to escape traps and sacrificial hooks. Ace's final perk is Ace in the Hole. Lady Luck is often on Ace's side, ensuring that if he pulls an item from a chest in the procedural, the item will have a 100% chance of having a very rare add-on or lower attached to it. It also has an added effect where there is a chance that it will also have a secondary attachment that is uncommon or lower as well. Whether Ace is extremely lucky or extremely unlucky depends on how you view the situation, as while he may not be in the best circumstances, he is determined to survive as long as his luck can hold out. Feng Min, the focused competitor. Feng Min was a young girl when she first picked up computer games, and she was instantly hooked. The new world she came across enchanted her with colors, sounds, and explosions, a chance to be somewhere else or someone else. Her parents saw no wrong with a few minutes in front of the screen, but as minutes turned into hours and sometimes days, they finally decided to pull the plug and force Feng Min to put more efforts into her studies. Feeling smothered by her parents who refused to see the potential of a future in gaming, she left home and spent her time in internet cafes and LAN parties where their rules didn't apply. She spent hours playing, streaming, competing to rise to the top. Her parents had become what she called holiday parents, as she never saw them outside of the holidays and became the black sheep of a one-child family. In the gaming world, however, she found the respect that she wanted. Nicknamed the Shining Lion, she was invited to a prestigious esports team and invited to live in their dorms. Here is where she found a sanctuary free from the misconceptions and prejudice that she had felt from her parents and the non-gaming world. Feng Min pushed herself to the limits to prove she was the best. Sleep was less important to her than training, and at the top of her game, she filled stadiums with fans who adored her. Of course, it couldn't last forever, and eventually she pushed herself too far, slept too little, and her performance began to slip. She started to lose. At night, constant doubts would force her to stay up, tormenting her with thoughts of disappointing her fans and her parents. She spiraled out of control and fell into a pattern of self-destruction. She started wandering the streets and visiting bars where no one knew of esports, and waking up in places she didn't remember. One day, after a particularly nasty bender, she woke up somewhere completely different, someplace she had never seen before. She awoke in the entity's never-ending nightmare. Despite this, Feng Min did not despair. As she learned more about the challenge she was up against, she realized that this is what she had been training for her entire life. And despite the deck being stacked against her, she was determined to win. Feng Min is an interesting person, having many disjointed aspects to her personality that make her hard to classify. She's adept at being malleable and fitting into many different situations, and thus pulling her own unique abilities from the entity. Feng's first perk is Technician. Adept at handling different types of machinery with care and precision, she makes less noise when repairing generators, as her time gaming has also helped her when it comes to fixing her own mistakes. If she fails a skill check, there is a percentage chance that the generator explosion will be prevented. Feng's second perk is Live. Learning a few tricks of the trade, Feng knows how to use momentum to her advantage. After doing a fast vault, Feng will break into a sprint at 150% of her normal running speed for up to 3 seconds. Afterwards, she will suffer from exhaustion and will be unable to use Lithe again until her exhaustion timer has depleted. Feng's final perk is Alert. Her acute senses are always on high alert. When a killer performs a break action, whether it be a pallet or a generator, their aura is revealed to Feng for up to 5 seconds. Determined to win the entity's little game, Feng jumps at any opportunity to get ahead, and will do anything and everything to make sure that she is the winner. She of course wants to be able to help others, but if it's down to it being either them or her, you can bet that she'll be the one running out the door. David King, the rugged scrapper. The single child of a wealthy family, David King seemed destined for greatness. While growing up in Manchester, he demonstrated serious potential in both sports and academics, and with his family connections, all doors were open to him. He could have succeeded at anything, if it weren't for his combative nature. David lived for the adrenaline rush of a good fight, and would go out of his way to get into one. His robustness and athletic abilities led him to rugby, where he could cut loose and really cause a ruckus. King excelled and gained a reputation as a promising, if somewhat reckless, rookie. His meteoric rise came to an abrupt end when he lost his temper and assaulted a referee, earning himself a lifetime ban from the league and cutting short what most people assumed was going to be a long, successful career. King was unconcerned. Money was no issue, so he took it as an early retirement and focused on other fun things to do. Free from the constraints of a career and enabled by the wealth of his family, David King spent most of his time at the pub, drinking, watching games, and getting into fights. Some might say that he was wasting his life away. Not many people knew that he was also an occasional debt collector, or that he fought in clandestine bare-knuckle fight clubs. When David King stopped showing up at the pub, the few friends that he still had were not surprised. They figured he had finally picked a fight with someone stronger than he was. And, in a way, they were right. David King has managed to pull abilities from the entity that synchronize perfectly with his scrapper background and confident attitude. His first perk is, We're Gonna Live Forever. David is surprisingly devoted to his friend's survival, willing to put himself in danger for their safety. With We're Gonna Live Forever, David gains a 25% stackable bonus to all of his blood points each time he takes damage protecting another survivor or saving them from the hook. His second perk is Dead Hard. David has learned not only how to take a beating, but also how to avoid taking a beating. After already injured and running, David obtains an active ability to dash forward and dodge an incoming attack, making him unhittable for a short time. After the dash has concluded, David will suffer from exhaustion and cannot use the perk again until he is no longer exhausted. David's final perk is No Mither. When David is wounded, he is at his most tenacious. With this perk, David will be in the broken state throughout the entirety of the match, and will be unable to be healed past his starting value. Due to this, however, his grunts of pain will be reduced, and he will no longer leave pools of blood behind. If he is downed and left alone, he will be able to recover from the dying state on his own, without needing another person to help get him back up. David has been humbled by the entity and the killers in the realm, having been shown that while he is indeed strong, he is far from invincible. Now, like his newfound companions, he must learn to survive in this new environment. Or at least, try to survive. Kate Denson, the hopeful songbird. One of Kate Denson's earliest memories was standing in front of her family, singing a song that she had learned that morning at school, and watching smiles spread across their faces. Seeing how something as simple as a song could make people so happy was the moment that she knew what she wanted to do with her life. She practiced, learned the guitar as soon as she was big enough to reach over it, and was performing in front of crowds by the time she was 8 years old. Her mother did everything that she could to fulfill Kate's dreams, taking her all over their home state of Pennsylvania, then across the South, and to even Nashville itself. Kate won folk music competitions and talent shows whenever she participated, but for her to win, others had to lose, and that wasn't in her nature. She only wanted an outlet, a way to touch people's lives, to make them forget the worries of the world and just enjoy themselves, if only for a while. With age came a newfound freedom. She bought a battered old Chevy truck and was able to travel around by herself, meeting fans and making new friends wherever she stopped. Hers wasn't a story of rock success, though. Just the road, her guitar, and maybe a good bourbon at the end of the day. From sun-baked festivals to dark and cozy bars, people flocked to hear her voice and her self-penned songs of friendship, family, love, and home. These sentiments weren't just lip service. She made sure to return home as often as she could to help out her community and entertain the local children with her tales of the wider world. She saw it as a way of giving back, of supporting others in the same way she had been. It was also home where she found most of her inspiration. She had always loved to take long walks in the woods around her town, exploring off the beaten track, finding a quiet spot to play and write her songs. She had a favorite location that she returned to time and time again, a natural hollow encircled by trees that looked almost as if it had been blasted out of the rocks thousands of years ago. Here she felt a strong connection with nature and to the earth itself. She let her mind be enveloped by the forest as it rewarded her with constant inspiration. She picked up her guitar and played, her fingers dancing across the fretboard. The music that she made this time, though, was unlike her usual uplifting tunes, being much more melancholy, even dark. Still, something compelled her to continue, to finish the song. The leaves vibrated in unison with the guitar strings, and the boughs of the trees lengthened. Spider-like legs descended from the canopy above, grasping for her. Regaining her senses, she grabbed a rock and tried to beat them back, but their skin was hard as iron, and the rock simply bounced off and skittered away. The legs coiled like tendrils around her limbs and lifted her towards the darkness overhead. And Kate caught a glimpse of something otherworldly, something that she wasn't supposed to see. Fog rolled across the clearing, obscuring both Kate and the creature of nightmares that drew her up towards itself. When the fog cleared, there was no sign of any struggle or life. Just an acoustic guitar, the scratch plate engraved with flowers, as well as the initials KD inlaid in mother of pearl. Despite her bright and cheerful attitude, Kate isn't one to give up without a fight. If anyone thinks that this buxom singer is going to go down easily, they've got another thing coming. Kate's first perk is Dance With Me. Kate is a master of the dance floor and has no problem outmaneuvering the clumsy meanderings of the killers that pursue her. Whenever performing a fast vault or jumping out of a locker, Kate will leave no scratch marks for up to 3 seconds. After using this perk, Dance With Me will go on cooldown for a short duration. Kate's second perk is Windows of Opportunity. Kate is able to use her ability to scope out opportunities in her music career in a very different way. With Windows of Opportunity, Kate will be able to see the auras of all pallets and windows within 20 meters of her. If she vaults a window or drops a pallet, the perk will go on cooldown for a short duration. Kate's final perk is Boil Over. Kate is not all rainbows and sunshine. If you make her angry, her warm smile can strike you like a bolt of lightning instead. With Boil Over, Kate puts up more of a struggle when the killer tries to pick her up, increasing the effects of her struggle when she's being carried by the killer. Along with this, she will also obscure the killer's ability to see hook auras within a short radius of them. Despite Kate's predicament, she's known to be an upbeat and joyous survivor who brings light and warmth into the entity's dark dominion. Whenever other survivors are about to lose hope, Kate is there to bring sunlight back into their life with her bright smile and warm demeanor. Adam Francis, the resourceful teacher. Adam was born in Rollington Town in Kingston, Jamaica. His father died in a car accident when he was 2, and his uncle took him in. His uncle was a strict but fair man who raised him to value education. At Kingston College, Adam discovered his father's published works, which triggered his passion for literature. His campus, however, was known for its focus in athletics. As a shy teenager with his nose stuck in books, he was the perfect prey for bullies. What he lacked in sports, though, he made up in grit. And using this, he learned to defend himself in the thick of it. It's during his years in college that he started to imagine his life elsewhere. While his close friends orbited the music industry, he followed a surer path. His grades granted him admission into higher education, and there was a demand for teachers abroad. After graduating university, he taught extra classes to afford applying fees overseas. He had a steady diet of long commutes, grading piles, nightly lesson plans, and early classes. After a year, he managed to apply for a position abroad. His first plane ride took him to southern Japan for a new start. There, his life in Kagoshima was hectic. There was little time to do everything he took for granted back home. His Japanese was elementary at best, which slowed him down. Buying groceries took hours, long commutes had to be planned, and his lessons relied on Japanese notions, which he had to learn. But after a few months, he found his rhythm. He reflected on it one morning while riding the train to work. He no longer had to study the kanji characters filling the map. His language skills had improved, he felt connected to his students, and he treated himself to luxurious restaurants on weekends. He even had his first ever vacation planned. Within seconds, though, Adam's world was brought to a halt. Rails hissed, bags came pouring down, and the floor trembled before the hit. Adam crashed forward as the train flipped upside down. He landed on a window pane as an unhinged door came flying at a passenger. He rolled over so that the door would hit him instead of the girl. He shut his eyes as he braced for impact, but nothing happened. He squinted one eye open and saw nothing but darkness. A heavy fog had taken over the train. Ice seemed to flow through his body, reaching his lips first, then the tip of his fingers, before spreading to his legs. No one truly knows what happened to Adam Francis. The school teachers imagined the worst when they watched the train derailment on the news and saw he was missing. Their fears seemed to be confirmed when Adam's bag was recovered from the crash site, but his body was never found. To this day, his uncle believes that Adam took off after the train crash, and is alive still, somewhere out there. Adam's knowledge and his grit and determination when dealing with bullies gives him a unique perspective on the entity's game. While he's not the strongest survivor out there, his ability to work around certain obstacles may give him all the ability that he needs to save his and other survivors' throats. Adam's first perk is diversion. Sometimes all you need to do is make someone see what they want to see. With diversion, after Adam has been within the killer's terror radius for a period of time, he'll gain the ability to throw stones while crouched. Throwing a stone will create a notification for the killer wherever the stone lands. After the stone has been thrown, Adam will have to spend time within the killer's terror radius again before he will be able to throw another. Adam's second perk is deliverance. Despite what some people say, it is rarely the meek who make it into the pages of history. After having saved another survivor from the hook, deliverance becomes active. With deliverance, if Adam is hooked, he will have a 100% chance to unhook himself from an escape attempt. The cost of this, however, is that he will be stuck in the broken status for a short duration. Adam's final perk is autodidact. Adam starts off the trial with a negative 25% progression penalty for any skill checks he makes when healing survivors. However, for every successful skill check he gets a token up to a cap. For each token that he has in autodidact, he will gain a plus 15% bonus to progression speeds when healing survivors. Autodidact, however, will not work if the player has another perk that also affects healing progression, or if he is using a medkit. Though he was the teacher when living in Japan, he must learn from the other survivors, as well as teach them his ways, if they are going to escape the entity's possession alive. Jeffrey Johansson, the Quiet Artist. Jeff Johansson was born and raised in Ormond, Alberta. He grew up as a quiet, only child with an aversion for large crowds. During high school, his anxious nature was mislabeled as shyness, which he covered up with a tough and stoic persona that intimidated bullies and teachers alike. At home, he discovered he had an interest in heavy metal and started a vinyl collection. The evocative symbolism on the covers inspired him to make art of his own, which helped him cope with his parents' constant fighting. To escape his parents' increasingly reoccurring blow-ups, Jeff started working at a video store. Few customers passed by, so he had a lot of free time to draw. A late-night regular named Frank noticed his sketches and asked him to do some artwork for his gang at an abandoned lodge up in Mount Ormond. Jeff accepted the challenge and painted a large mural depicting the Legion. He was given a $50 bill and a 12-pack for his hard work. It was his first paid commission and a milestone to be proud of. After his parents' inevitable divorce, Jeff was forced to move in with his mother in Winkler, Manitoba, which was miles from his home and his dad. In Winkler, Jeff was more isolated than ever, except for art and music. His solace came shortly after graduating high school when he started working at a local bar with live music performances. He found a roadie gig shortly thereafter, leaving Winkler behind. A few years later, Jeff got injured after getting involved in a fight during a concert. He was told he could lose part of his eyesight, so his doctor asked him to stay in town in order to monitor him. It was a difficult time where Jeff had to reassess his life choices. He decided to go back to school. Art school. His eyesight slowly returned, but he had to be careful. He took a few courses, experimenting with a wide range of mediums, but ultimately choosing oil painting and digital art, the latter of which offered him paid internships. He took up a desk job and found his calling in designing labels for microbreweries. He led a quiet, simple life. He brewed beer, took in a rescue dog, designed tattoos, and freelanced album covers for bands he liked. All until one morning when he got a phone call from Ormond saying that his father had passed, leaving a few things to sort out. Jeff drove all the way back out to Ormond. He felt a pang of nostalgia when he reached his late father's house. Inside there was an old guitar case sitting against the wall. In it was a black vintage model with a sticky note that said, "For my boy." He stayed in town longer than he planned to, reminiscing about his childhood, and driving by his former high school, he remembered the mural he painted up on Mount Ormond. He picked up a 12-pack and headed for the lodge. After weeks of not hearing back from Jeff, his colleagues assumed that grief had gotten the better of him. His neighbor had tired of sitting his dog, which became more agitated as days went by. The dog, unfortunately, became a stray again, and those who ran across it seemed to think that it was confused, all while it tried to seek the familiar trail of Jeff's multi-scent. Not even Jeff truly knows what happened to him after he went up to Mount Ormond, but at this particular moment, it doesn't really much matter. He has no interest in being fodder for the entity or the killers that now pursue him. Jeff's first perk is breakdown. Jeff tries to do what he can in order to prevent himself from repeating bad situations. Whenever he is unhooked or unhooks himself, the hook he is on breaks, and the killer's aura will be shown to him for a short duration. Jeff's second perk is aftercare. Despite Jeff's solitary nature, he is a caring individual and quickly becomes attached to the survivors around him. Whenever he is rescued from the hook, or rescues another survivor from the hook, he will be able to see the aura of that survivor from that point forward. If he is hooked again, however, any survivor's auras that he had gained will be lost. Jeff's final perk is distortion. Jeff knows how to blend in with the crowd when he doesn't wish to be noticed. With distortion, Jeff will start the match with 3 tokens. Whenever Jeff's aura would be shown to the killer, instead, a token will be consumed. For a short period after, his aura and scratch marks will not be visible to the killer. A token in distortion will not be consumed, however, if Jeff is in the dying state or if he is affected by a trap. Jeff does not enjoy the situation that he's in. He's an artist, not a snack. Jeff's stoic personality is going to make sure that he survives, no matter what the entity throws his way. Jane Romero, the influential celebrity. Jane Romero was the daughter of famous actress Loretta Lawrence, of whom she had no memory. Her parents had separated when she was still a baby, mainly since her mother was often away filming. Jane was raised by her father, a struggling visual artist, and due to this, she grew up torn between resenting her mother's absence from her life, as well as admiring her presence on screen. As a teenager, Jane secretly wished to emulate her mother's talents. She would direct and perform in plays, audition for TV commercials, and help her father in his studio. During her senior year, she entered a national oratory contest and won first prize. Her performance attracted the attention of a radio station that contacted her for an interview. During the live show, her natural charm and repartee impressed the staff, who offered her a part-time job at the station. After graduating a college in communication, she quit her job at the station to work for a trendy variety show. But her frank delivery and ad-libs were not appreciated by the show's executives, who fired her after 5 months. Desperate for another opportunity, Jane pitched a show at the radio station she used to work at, her proposal being too risky. 4 months later, she received a phone call from a producer who had seen reruns of the show. He was looking for a co-host to spark up the failing show Quick Talk. Live television meant long hours, a low salary, and no stability. But it also offered a platform to broadcast her views. She disputed the crude, inflammatory tone of Quick Talk and pushed for relatable coverage of personal issues. Her honest delivery resonated with her audience, and within weeks, the show's viewership was steadily growing. After 2 years, she launched a full-hour segment called The Jane Romero Show, which was broadcast nationally and covered tabooed topics, including her personal struggle with abandonment. Her show broke records, and her initials, JR, became synonymous with projects ranging from beauty creams to fashion accessories. But Jane needed more. She wanted others to follow in her footsteps. She published a memoir that covered her childhood with an absent mother. Her book was an instant bestseller, but was reviewed harshly. Critics called it a serving of sad anecdotes seasoned with bland, generic self-help tips. Jane took the criticism to heart, since, despite her success, a voice in the back of her mind was starting to doubt her achievements. Her success also generated into an increasingly demanding schedule, with a growing pressure to entertain constantly. She canned an episode and instead launched a 2-hour-long special on divorce. Her stress peaked when she learned that her mother had agreed to star in her show. Jane put on a brave face and began the show. Most of it went off without a hitch, but her mother walked on the set, smiling warmly at the audience, and Jane's stomach lurched unpleasantly. She was consumed by a violent envy that had been festering, yet she carried on with a strained smile, until Loretta interrupted her, saying that they weren't actually related. The interview went haywire after that. After the show, Jane was driving to her father's house in New Jersey. She needed to talk things over with him, as she had not been feeling like herself lately. She turned to a freeway along the coast to avoid major congestion and popped some painkillers to numb the throbbing pain in her temples, which had been nagging her all day. She started to relax and turned on the radio. Classical music was playing and the drive was slow. Black ice covered the highway, which was packed with cars on their way back home. Night fell. A darkness began to blur the corners of her vision and turn the headlights into swirls of red. Jane blinked to sharpen their outlines, but each time she closed her eyes, her eyelids became heavier and heavier until they remained shut for a moment too long. The following morning, authorities were fishing Jane's car out from the water. Despite leading a meticulous search for weeks, they were unable to retrieve her body. The airing and production of the Jane Romero Show was suspended until after her funeral, which both her father and mother attended. As the public grieved for Jane, there was a surge of orders for JR products, and all her episodes were re-released a month later, with an opening credit that wished her eternal peace. Obviously, eternal peace is the last thing on Jane's mind at this point. Despite her celebrity status, Jane has no trouble getting into the thick of it with the other survivors. She's also one to refuse giving up. After everything that has happened, she'll be damned if she's gonna let anyone get in her way now. Jane's first perk is solidarity. Jane knows how to find a common ground between herself and others, and finds that sharing these experiences can help both parties heal. With solidarity, if Jane is injured and heals another survivor without using a medkit, She will also heal herself for a percentage of what she heals the other survivor. Jane's second perk is Poised. Jane is extremely confident under pressure. With Poised, after a generator is completed, whether it was Jane who completed it or not, she will leave no scratch marks for up to 10 seconds. Jane's final perk is Head On. Jane is strong-willed, and when she's made up her mind, no one better be standing in her way. After being in a locker for 3 seconds, Head On activates. Performing a rushed action out of a locker while Head On is active will stun a killer for up to 3 seconds if they are standing within range. Jane will suffer from exhaustion for a short duration. Jane is not a fool to think that the procedural is anything like the entertainment industry that she is used to. This, however, doesn't mean that she won't understand how to handle the circumstances that she's in. Her level temperament will undoubtedly help her keep her head on her shoulders. At least, hopefully, it will. Yui Kimura, the hardened street racer. Despite her traditional upbringing, Yui Kimura raced scooters in her hometown of Hida, where she earned the reputation of being able to do the impossible with very little. Her father did his best to steer her away from what he believed to be masculine pursuits, but her grandmother secretly shared with her grandfather's engineering manuals and notes on car and motorcycle engines. Yui read her grandfather's manuals and learned fast. She was able to not only maintain her scooter, but she modified the engine so that she could compete with the other boys on motocrosses. With her grandfather's good luck hachimaki wrapped around her arm, she raced local boys who, unable to keep up with her, attempted to work together to orchestrate her defeat with no success. Yui outmaneuvered them at every turn and became a sensation to all of her friends. When it came time to apply for school, Yui gathered her courage and confessed her ambition to race motorcycles to her father. An altercation ensued, and when Yui refused to apply for proper education, her father felt a great shame and told her she was no longer welcome in their home. With a heavy heart, Yui left for Nagoya with the blessings and savings of her grandmother. Nagoya was not what Yui expected. She could only find low-grade clerical work or minor jobs as a hostess. With the last of the money her grandmother gave her, she purchased a racing bike and entered illegal street races where she won more money than she had ever seen. Rumors of her courage and quick reflexes spread like wildfire. Soon she had an unofficial retinue of female motorcyclists wearing Yui's signature pink color. Along with a gang following her, Yui realized she had a stalker in the shadows. When Yui found out that her lucky handkerchief had been stolen from her apartment, she took her concerns to the police, who laughed and dismissed her, saying that her stalker could be a nice guy and that she would probably marry him in the near future. One evening, Yui returned home to find the stalker in her apartment, going through her things. He hadn't seen her, and she wasn't sure what she was going to do, but the sight of him going through her clothes was too much to bear. She yelled at him to leave. This is when the stalker turned on her with a knife. He lunged at her, but she evaded his attack, causing him to hit the wall and drop his knife. Without hesitation, Yui tackled him. They rolled over on the ground, exchanging desperate blows. Yui took more hits than she ever had experienced racing scooters in Shirakawa. With a surge of adrenaline, she managed to overpower her stalker, snatching the knife from the floor and holding the razor-sharp blade to his neck. When the police reached her apartment, they took him away and rushed Yui to the hospital for trauma. X-rays revealed that she had broken her arm and foot in several places. It wasn't long before her gang showed up one by one, and together they helped her pay her medical bills. Rehabilitation was difficult, but Yui never gave up, and with the support of her gang, she steadily recovered until she was ready to race once again. Yui's first race after the attack, her gang presented her with a new pink hachimaki, with their signatures and good luck messages written all over it. Yui vowed that she would help other women with her winnings and influence. Her gang became known as the Sakura 7 Gang. They all wore pink hachimakis as a symbol of unity and support for women needing help from stalkers and abusers. The Sakura 7 grew beyond the 7 members, and Yui's pink signature became synonymous with women's empowerment. At street races, women would line up in droves to support her. After winning 7 straight races in a row, she attracted the attention of a sponsor. She not only earned a spot at the All Japan Moto Championship, but was the youngest woman to ever race and win in the prestigious event. Her sponsorship soon tripled, so too did her gang. But everything came to a staggering halt at the illegal Tokyo Kick 3000 street races. Yui was leading the race until she entered an unnatural fog that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Baffled and confused, she stopped her bike and dismounted. It wasn't long before she realized she wasn't in Tokyo anymore. Yui must now work with her new gang of women and men if they are to hope to escape the trials that lie before them. Luckily for them, Yui knows what it's like to be part of a team, and has the skills to help others in need. Yui's first perk is Lucky Break. Lucky Break is a unique perk that affects how much Yui bleeds when in the procedural. When she has been hit in the procedural, Lucky Break will start ticking down. Until it has fully depleted, Yui will not bleed or leave blood pools behind. Yui's second perk is Any Means Necessary. Yui is willing to stand up for herself using whatever means necessary. With this perk, if Yui comes across a pallet that is knocked down, she can use her ability to set it back up. Once she has done this, the perk will go on cooldown, preventing her from lifting it up for a short duration. Yui's final perk is Breakout. When Yui has a friend in need, you can bet that she will be nearby. When a survivor is being carried by a killer, and Yui is within 6 meters of them, she gains the haste status effect, increasing her overall speed. While she remains in this radius, the survivor's struggle meter will increase 20% faster than normal. The entity has become more brazen in its attempt to grab survivors from the world, no longer snatching the lost or the dying. Yui was grabbed from a public place, in the middle of a race no less, which means that no one is safe from falling into the entity's clutches. Zarina Kassir, the plucky documentarian. Growing up in a Lebanese household in Brooklyn, Zarina struggled with 2 unique cultural identities. She felt that this cultural difference painted a target on her back. To avoid ridicule and bullies, she observed what popular kids liked and learned to project the image they preferred. At school, she would go by the name Karina and trashed her foreign lunches. At home, the news channel was always on. Urgent reports of injustice captivated Zarina, inspiring her to produce her own stories. When she was a teenager, she embraced her real name and roots, borrowing her father's digital camera to interview members of her community in Bay Ridge. By posting her content online, she slowly built up a loyal following. Each week, she picked a new issue and challenged people to speak their minds on camera. When she heard a rumor that a fast food restaurant owner was exploiting workers, she decided to go undercover and produce a hard-hitting film. She modified her look, faked an accent, and secured a waitress position at the restaurant. After 3 weeks of unpaid work, she was fired for demanding her paycheck. To retaliate, she posted clips of the restaurant owner's abusive behavior, and within hours, the news had picked up her story. But instead of supporting the events that happened, they somehow spun it to create sympathy for the restaurant. Embittered by the experience, Zarina committed to become a full independent producer and filmmaker. Her first feature film was for a competition at school, inspired by an English class poem about Sacco and Vanzetti, 2 Italian migrants controversially executed for murder. Her film won first prize and launched her as an uncompromising documentary filmmaker. Months later, her world turned upside down. A public video surveillance camera filmed her father carrying 2 coffees at a street corner a few blocks from home. A tall, hooded man stood behind him. The man shouted something at her father, who took a step back, startled. Suddenly and unexpectedly, the man pushed him into the street as a car sped by. His death caused a shockwave of anger and pain that left Zarina in pieces. The perpetrator, Clark Stevenson, was soon arrested and incarcerated for manslaughter. Zarina became obsessed with Clark, his gang, IR-28, his short prison sentence, his apparent lack of remorse. A year went by and she uncovered enough about Clark to shed more light on his crime. With the last of her inheritance, she bought a new camera and a plane ticket to Nebraska, bribing the warden at Hellshire Penitentiary to let her in for an interview. She filmed their first meeting and asked him about her father, his gang, and his violent tendencies. Clark refused to talk, But in the weeks that followed, she used her research to push his buttons and finally got a confession of a premeditated crime. Zarina's film became a tribute to her father and the trail of blood left by gang violence. When the news finally picked up the story, it was because the film had gained international acclaim. Some inmates contacted her when they heard about her documentary. Most of them shared eccentric anecdotes in hopes of being filmed, but one story stood out from the rest. An entire wing in Hillshire Penitentiary was sealed off because of the Mad Mick Massacre. The official story was that an Irish outlaw had heartlessly slaughtered the warden and his guards. From working on her Sacco and Vanzetti film, Zarina knew that the official story was not always the true story. She investigated Hillshire's records and found an Irish-born inmate sentenced to 15 years for assault in 1860. According to the penitentiary's blueprint, the sealed-off wing was part of Hillshire's original infrastructure. If she reached that sealed-off section, she might be able to shed some light on the Mad Mick story. The next morning, she joined the Hillshire Penitentiary walking tour. She blended into the crowd of jet-lagged tourists and veered off when they headed towards the kitchens. She had memorized the blueprint and knew exactly where to go and how to avoid the surveillance cameras. An unexpected security detail nearly cut her investigation short, but she was able to hide under an old, dusty prison bed. When the guards disappeared, she continued to search and finally found Mick's cell. Entering the dark, dilapidated cell, Zarina ran her hand across the old brick wall. Her fingers felt a marking and traced the letters, Death to Bayshore. A loose brick fell, revealing a gap. She inserted her hand. Fingers landed on a piece of cold, cracked metal. She fished it out, an old, rusty wrench. A damp chill ran down her spine as she looked down. A man lay at her feet, bleeding, his limbs contorted and his eyes dark and terrified. Her father's eyes. A pool of crimson blood pooled on the black pavement. Paralyzed and in shock, Zarina shut her eyes to push these nightmarish visions out of her head as a thick, black fog filled the cell. Zarina may not realize it yet, but she may have come across the greatest story that she'll ever know. But to fully capitalize on this possibility, she's first going to have to find out how she's going to escape alive. Zarina's first perk is off the record. Zarina has learned that a quiet approach is sometimes the best. Once she is unhooked or escapes from the hook on her own, off the record activates for a short duration. While off the record is active, Zarina's aura will not be shown to the killer, and grunts of pain caused by injuries are reduced by 100%. Zarina's second perk is Red Herring. Zarina has noticed that people tend to only pay attention to whatever makes the loudest noise. After repairing a generator for at least 3 seconds, it will become highlighted with a yellow aura. This generator will stay highlighted until it's fully repaired, or she repairs a new generator. If Zarina enters any locker, a loud noise indicator will appear for the killer at the highlighted generator's location. Zarina's third perk is For the People. Zarina will risk life and injury for others. For the People is only active while at full health. Pressing the active button while healing another survivor without a medkit will instantly heal them from dying to injured or from injured to healthy. As a side effect though, Zarina will be put into the broken status for a short duration. Zarina has already seen firsthand the trickery that the entity can utilize to get others to fall into despair. Now she struggles with the others, her very life the prize for her success, as she hopes to survive what may be the biggest scoop of her life. Felix Richter, the... Woof. The visionary architect. Yeah. Felix Richter was born to Janice and Ursula Richter in Coburg, Germany, where the Richter family had deep connections and were among the most respected of its physicians. His parents, both members of an ancient society, were always out of the Richter manor, at medical conferences, or providing humanitarian aid around the world. Traveling exposed young Felix to new cultures, languages, and architecture unlike anything he had ever seen before. He wasn't sure when the architectural bug bit, but when it did, it bit hard. And he knew that despite his family's legacy, he would one day design buildings that would inspire the world. By 23, he was considered an architectural prodigy, having won the Swiss Architect Medal and the German National Design Award. Yet, despite his success, Felix couldn't shake this gnawing feeling that his success had more to do with luck and connection than talent and hard work. Growing up, Felix was socially awkward and introverted, preferring his imagination to the company of others. He had few friends, so when he wasn't traveling with his parents, Felix was in his father's library, devouring rare books, studying history and architecture, soaking up anything and everything he could on architectural movements throughout the centuries. His father hoped that young Felix would learn to be more outgoing, and hired every possible specialist to help improve his social skills. When these efforts failed, he threw in the proverbial towel and figured his son would learn when he was ready. He then joined young Felix in the library, where he helped him build elaborate wooden models of buildings while telling him wild stories about his secret club and their ancient battle against a dark and ominous force. Stories Felix was sure his father had made up to make his Imperiati group sound cooler than it actually was. Felix sometimes wondered if his design sensibilities came from his summer trips to Dyer Island, a private island that boasted some of the world's finest homes and designs. Every summer, Felix would accompany his parents to the island, where members of the Imperiati would encourage their children to network and forge lifelong connections. Felix didn't mingle well with the other teenagers, but he did make 4 friends who, like himself, didn't quite fit the high society mold. They were often ridiculed by other teens and disparagingly called the pariahs, a name they actually liked and gladly adopted. Instead of practicing public speaking and engaging in endless debates, the pariahs spent most of their time exploring the ruins and mysteries of the island, until one of their adventures took a turn for the worse. Exploring an abandoned internment camp, they descended into what seemed to be an underground laboratory, where they uncovered old leather journals with illustrations and notes of inhumane experiments conducted on prisoners of the First Opium War, held by the British East India Company. As they pushed through the door, they found a chamber scattered with human skeletons and dusty vials filled with an unknown serum. Before they could examine the contents, the fog seemed to shake beneath their feet. A hissing sound filled their ears. A strange fog suddenly appeared, and giant claws seemed to burst from the ground as dark imagination mingled with reality to terrorize them. Before they understood what was happening, Felix's father and several other parents came to their rescue, using strange tools and objects to protect them. Felix stared at the scene in shock and disbelief. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming or living one of his father's ridiculous supernatural stories. By the time he realized it wasn't a dream, it was all over. The pariahs were safe, but their parents had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. After the shock of his father's disappearance, Felix searched for any theory that could help him understand the phenomena he had encountered on the island. He exchanged notes with the pariahs and other people he had met online who had also lost loved ones in a similar way. The tragedy had fostered a strong relationship between the pariahs, and for years they worked together to unravel the mystery of what had happened to their parents. But nothing made sense, and every lead they pursued hit a dead end. With time, their efforts dwindled, and the 5 friends slowly grew apart, each going their separate ways, hoping to forget the nameless darkness that had robbed them of their parents. Over the years, Felix proved to be an exceptional architect, though he found little inspiration working for others. He realized his father was right. His lack of social skills was holding him back. With dedication and purpose, he improved his diction and decorum and learned how to network or play act, as he liked to call it. He created a perfect facade to make him more likable and popular with potential clients. After working for several architectural firms, he established his own, with his colleague, Lauren Golder. Both shared a similar vision and were philosophically opposed to the formulaic, modernist buildings, often experimenting with unusual materials, shapes, and structures. Felix continued to undermine traditional expectations in favor of the edgy and unconventional devices that set the architectural world abuzz. But even with all the accolades, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a phony, like an actor who had learned a part instead of a true architect who had inspired the world with an impeccable design. During these moments of insecurity and self-doubt, he would distract himself with endless parties and drown his anxieties in alcohol, wishing his father was still around for some harsh advice and tempered wisdom. Eventually, Felix's girlfriend announced that he was going to be a father. The news shook him to the core, and wanting to inspire his unborn child as much as his father had inspired him, he quickly pulled his life together. What he needed was a project that would challenge him and cement his worth as an architect. As fate would have it, the perfect opportunity presented itself when old friends of his father commissioned his firm, Richter & Golder, to build something new and unconventional on Dyer Island. The challenge excited and terrified Felix, who now drowned his anxieties with articles and books on parenting. Within 6 months, the Dyer restoration project was underway, and as Felix surveyed the island, he suddenly heard a familiar voice calling out to him from beyond the shattered Victorian buildings and the crumbling ruins, hiding dark stories long hidden and forgotten. Through a strange, gathering fog, he saw a form slowly take shape. His eyes widened and his lips parted, but no words issued forth. Could it be? Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet, with a dawning realization, Felix staggered back as he watched his father emerge from the fog. His legs felt weak, and his rising heartbeat thrashed against his ears. It was him. It was really him. His unborn child would know his grandfather, and he could finally show him just how much he had accomplished since he disappeared. They stared at one another for a long moment, and then his father gave him a look of disappointment, turned his back on him, and proceeded to walk away. Over his pounding heart, Felix chased after him and was never seen again. Felix's first perk is visionary. Felix is extraordinarily focused on the other survivors' means of escape. With visionary, Felix can see the aura of all generators within a certain distance of him. After a generator has been completed, visionary is disabled for a short duration. Felix's second perk is desperate measures. Felix can manage to pull power from moments when things are dire. With desperate measures, for each survivor that is injured, dying, or on the hook, Felix gets a bonus to unhooking and healing speed. Felix's final perk is built to last. Felix knows how to get the most of any tool he has. With built to last, once per match, if Felix depletes an item's usage, he can recharge a percentage of its charges after 10 seconds. Felix followed the shadow of his father into the entity's playground, and is now fighting for his life while sticking to the shadows in an attempt to avoid the entity's thrall of killers. It is currently unknown if he'll ever be able to get back to the world and to the family he left behind, but he may be able to find answers here, and learn just how closely he and his family are connected to the entity. Elodie Rocoto, the occult investigator. Born into a lush Parisian household, Elodie Rocoto grew up in a comfortable home miles away from the verdant island of Madagascar, her parents' birthplace. Her backpack was always heavy and usually contained no schoolwork. She carried the essentials, a few history books, some printed maps, and a compact shovel. Instead of wasting away with regurgitated facts from her classes, She explored the city to discover the stories behind each statue, neighborhood, and street sign. She collected bits and pieces of Paris, making it her own. When she was 14, her parents took her to Dyer Island for a business trip. To her grand disappointment, the island was a private site for exclusive members of the Imperiati. She was forced to attend pretentious and awkward social mixers daily. After a few weeks on the island, she met the pariahs, like-minded teenagers who had no interest in being pawns for their parents' political chessboard. On dull, rainy nights, she would convince them to sneak out and explore the island unsupervised. One foggy evening, they stumbled upon an abandoned internment camp. Felix, one of the pariahs, didn't want to go in, but Elodie insisted. Inside, they found a strange underground laboratory in ruins. The pariahs grew excited, browsing through the strange apparatuses for trophies and mementos. But Elodie noticed something on the far left corner of the wall, odd scratches in the shape of a circle. She ran her fingernails against the cool concrete. The marks were deep and narrow. A warm whisper suddenly sent her mind adrift. Deep rumbling thunder, an ashen, sanded beach. Incomplete. She was compelled to touch the ice-cold sand and draw a circle with a line in the middle. A sharp thunderclap and lightning whipped the sky. The ground shook as sleek obsidian claws tore through the concrete floor, ripping the earth open. The building began to collapse, and Elodie spotted her mother wielding a bizarre instrument, while her father told her to run. Then, complete darkness. Elodie never saw her parents again. For years, this nightmare woke her in the middle of the night, cold, sweating, shaking like a leaf. As a child, she suffered from night terrors and often resisted going to bed. To soothe her mind, her grandma would light a tea candle and tell her stories until the wick extinguished in a hot pool of liquefied wax. The perfume of the warm, vanilla-scented wax would lull Elodie to sleep as she envisioned stories of legendary heroes defeating fear and foes. Elodie had forgotten the stories, but she still remembered her longing for the verdant Malagasy rainforests and colossal mountains that her grandmother described. When Elodie felt cold and numb with grief, she would use a vanilla-scented candle and summon her childhood memories of this distant, idyllic place, raising her spirits to rise above her crippling depression. 14 years later, Elodie still searched for the missing pieces of the puzzle. No rational explanation could explain her parents' disappearance, so she had been looking elsewhere. She researched any and all legends that mentioned a dark force that snatched people at night without trace. From there, she translated old tales and built a tapestry of narratives from around the world that corroborated the uncanny way her parents had vanished on Dyer Island. She also gathered artifacts made by ancient civilizations who sought to destroy or resurrect the incomprehensible and indescribable thing that took her parents. There were various names for it, differing from one language to the next. The abyss, the infinite, the whole. Her findings pushed her further into the dark field of occultism. The pariahs were long gone. She'd alienated them with her theories, but she refused to give up on her parents. Elodie had to set out into the cold, misty evening. She turned a corner, leaving Paris's 13th arrondissement, an eccentric neighborhood with a substantial library dating from the Middle Ages. She had pressing work to do for Hazra Shah, the collector, an occult specialist who archived rare artifacts. He'd recruited her after she'd salvaged a rare, stolen Maori statue of spidery fangs like claws she'd seen on Dyer Island. For the next 5 years, Elodie had been procuring occult relics for the collector. In exchange, he provided large sums of money, equipment, and precise information about obscure manuscripts. Just as the collector requested, she had secured the annals of a witch trial convicting a mother birthing conjoined twins in the 17th century. According to legend, an occult incantation was engraved on a set of skulls, all of which the collector possessed, except one, the witch's skull. There were no traces of where the skull was now, but Elodie had found a newspaper article dating back to the same year, mentioning that most remains had been relocated to the catacombs to avoid a pandemic. Elodie was acting on a hunch. Breaking into the catacombs to retrieve a lost skull involved certain risks, but no more than the previous work she'd done for the Collector. With a flashlight, she followed the ancient layout of the catacombs and spotted a collapsed wall. A few large stones blocked the way. Working for the Collector had its perks. The brick mortar had been poorly mixed, showing traces of sand. The whole thing was brittle, and the ground was moist from the damp evening air. This was her way in. The journey beneath was long and treacherous. The air was heavy and moldy. She gasped when her keychain flashlight hit an endless wall of bleached white skulls. Something cracked behind her. She spun around and collided headfirst with a baseball bat. Pain exploded in her skull and darkness filled her view. When she came back to, a man was carrying her over his shoulder, venturing deeper inside of the catacombs. He was wearing a dark robe. The Black Veil. She'd managed to elude them until now. Ruthless and lethal, they went by many names. She'd figured out that they ultimately all worked for the same group, a ring of occult fanatics rumored to perform human sacrifices for what they called the Old One. She had to get out of there, fast. Elodie spotted a loose skull on the wall, grabbed it, and smashed it on her assaulter's head. Stunned, the man lost his balance and Elodie hit the ground running. As she turned a corner, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her side. She looked down and saw a large blade planted there. Shocked, she removed the knife and warm blood spurted out. Her heartbeat rang in her ears and her vision blurred. She fell to her knees. Summoning all of her strength, she drew a circle on the ground with a shaking, blood-red finger and traced a line in the middle. An opaque heaviness fell over her shoulders. A familiar scent of vanilla, spiked fruits, and lychee nuts coated the air. Thin, tropical rain drizzled down on leafy vines. Warmth. Madagascar. A ghostly cry erupted from the thick foliage. Elodie looked up and the vines turned into hissing snakes. The soft canopy soil suddenly turned ashen and collapsed under her feet. She sank into something dense and cold that swallowed her like quicksand. She screamed before being smothered by the abyss, the infinite, the whole. She found what she had been searching for. Elodie's first perk is Appraisal. Elodie has a careful eye that notices what many overlook. With this perk, Elodie starts the trial with 3 tokens. After a chest has already been opened, Elodie can consume 1 token to search it again for another. Along with this, searching chests becomes faster than normal. Elodie's second perk is Deception. Her adventurous lifestyle requires moments of crafty misdirection. When Elodie interacts with a locker while holding the sprint button, she can trigger a loud noise notification for the killer at her location instead of entering the locker. Afterwards, she will not leave any scratch marks for 3 seconds. Elodie's final perk is Power Struggle. Elodie's never given up, and she's not going to start now. While Elodie is being carried by the killer, reaching a certain percentage wiggle threshold activates Power Struggle. While Power Struggle is active, you can drop a nearby standing pallet to stun the killer and be released. Power Struggle is deactivated for the rest of the match if it is triggered successfully. Elodie and Felix, 2 former members of the Pariahs, have now made their way into the entity's realm. Could this be coincidence, or is there something much darker that draws them together? Yun-Jin Lee, the self-interested music producer. Resilient and ambitious, Yun-Jin was born into a life of hardship, finding success in the music industry after years of effort and self-sacrifice. As a child, Yun-Jin was fascinated by sound, mimicking drums and hitting keys on the piano. When she turned 10, however, she lost her instruments. Her family was heavily in debt and did not make the payments in time. The creditors took everything they owned, including the house. Yun-Jin held her 4-year-old sister tightly as she cried. They moved into a windowless, 2-bedroom basement. Since her parents worked day and night to pay their debt, Yun-Jin became her sister's caretaker. Every night, she sang until they both fell asleep. At 17, the renowned record label, Mighty One Entertainment, came to her high school to audition talent. She was rejected as an idol trainee, but obtained an unpaid internship at the studio. For the following years, she created some of the studio's biggest hits without any credit or recognition. To get her dues, she emerged in the public eye wearing a flamboyant fashion and put sound bites into her songs that looped her artist's name, magnum opus. Fans began to recognize her songs, and she became the producer of No Spin, a poorly performing boy band who needed her special touch. Dissatisfied with No Spin's commercial sound, she sought a rogue element to make the band stand out. Through her contacts and talent, she found the edgy, raw sound of Ji-woon Hak. She relaunched No Spin with Ji-woon as its newest member, and within hours, their first video was a viral sensation. Their success cemented Yun-Jin's reputation as a shrewd producer. Adorned in high fashion to attend luxurious events, Yun-Jin's harsh, impoverished childhood seemed far behind her. She moved into a penthouse and dined with socialites in skyline restaurants with breathtaking views of Seoul. The success of the first album broke records, setting the bar high for No Spin's second. As they were recording new tracks, the fire alarm suddenly blared. Concerned for her safety, Yun-Jin hurried to evacuate the building and left the dallying staff behind. Only when she bolted out into the street did she realize that No Spin was nowhere amongst the coughing crowd. A Goliath of flames engulfed the building, slowly tamed by the steady streams of fire hoses. All members of No Spin perished in the fire, except one, Ji-woon. The album was ruined. The band was over. She would be shelved while Ji-woon would rot away as an instructor for idol trainees. But she refused to be the victim who watched helplessly as vultures swooped in to take what was hers. Unknown to Mighty One Entertainment, she created new tracks to relaunch Ji-woon's career. She pushed him to tap into his grief and create a song exploring the pangs of sadness and loss. The music video showed Ji-woon saying goodbye to each member of No Spin. Yun-Jin cleverly launched the song under Ji-woon's newly adopted stage name, the Trickster. He would embody both fear and awe like the legendary Dokkaebi spirits. Ji-woon's song was a global phenomenon. Its universal themes of grief and guilt resonated internally. Together, Yun-Jin and the Trickster toured the world. Success greeted them on every shore. Yet disturbingly, so did a series of eccentric murders. The connection unsettled Yun-Jin as she noticed that the tour dates coincided with the victim's time of death. She was weary after the loss of No Spin and anxious to preserve her artist, so she increased the Trickster's security detail. What if the serial killer was an unhinged fan fixated on the Trickster, inspired by the artist's morbid songs? Returning to Seoul, Yun-Jin worked with Ji-woon on his new material. When she entered the studio at the brink of dawn, she was surprised to see Ji-woon already there. He seemed exhausted, like he had worked all night. When she listened to his track, she discovered a bizarre intro filled with shrieks and snares. It was too experimental for her taste. A week later, another death was reported. The body showed traces of torture and was arranged in the same flamboyant style as the previous murders. This time, diamond cufflinks gouged into the victim's eyes. The following day, the victim was on every television channel.
A video from the victim's social media showed her squealing, surprised when her boyfriend handed her a heart-shaped birthday cake. Yun-Jin's stomach churned. That voice, so familiar, and yet she had never met the victim. The next morning, her heart froze when she listened to the Trickster's opening track. The shrieks in this song matched the victim's squeal. Did he sample the victim's birthday video? No, that was impossible. He had recorded this song before the murder was even reported. She stared at Ji-woon on the other side of the booth's glass window. He was No Spin's only survivor. Everyone else was dead, not to mention the eccentric murders that matched his tour dates. Death trails that seemed to converge to him. If he caused this, no artist would survive the scandal. Yun-Jin's career, no, her life would be over. All she had would be destroyed. A wave of nausea surged over her. Heart racing, she rushed to the restroom. Wild thoughts blazed through her mind as she splashed icy water over her face. There had to be a simpler explanation. Perhaps she was overworked. Or maybe she did not trust her success. Her mind was fabricating this suspicion because disaster was easier than to trust success. It was all in her head. She returned to the recording booth, eager to put her worries behind her. Months later, pressure came from Mighty One Entertainment executives. Revenue was down, and they blamed the Trickster since they disapproved of the violent themes in his music and the knife tricks he pulled during performances. While Yun-Jin was furious they scapegoated her artist, she agreed that Ji-woon's sound was too niche to generate profit. She told Ji-woon she fought them off, but was ultimately outnumbered. Because of her initial fury, he believed her to be on his side. They were given 3 months to create and perform the next hit for Mighty One. Months flew by, and the time came for Yun-Jin to take a seat at the executive's private show. She was confident about her song, but as soon as the music started, she knew something was amiss. Dense, foul smoke permeated the room. Yun-Jin coughed and gasped for air, but the more she coughed, the more she inhaled. Her body sank into the chair, her limbs heavy and numb, and her eyes widened as she watched, terrified, as a nightmare came to life. The Trickster was a whirlwind of blood, slashing, stabbing, and chopping limbs. The executives were carved up like meat. They could not run. They were stuck, like Yun-Jin, paralyzed. A boiling rage swelled in her gut. How could she have denied her instincts? The fire, the murders on tour, it was him. It had always been him, and she had known from the start. Now her career was over, and so was Mighty One. Everyone she had worked with, her colleagues, her friends, dying before her eyes. Everything she had, taken from her once more. No, she would not let him. He would pay. He would know her suffering. Suddenly, dark coils of black fog rose from the ground and she was somewhere else. Bright lights flashed and blinded her. A spotlight found her in the darkness. Then a crowd erupted, chanting her name. Magnum opus. Magnum opus. She smiled and welcomed the darkness within. Yun-Jin's first perk is Fast Track. Whenever another survivor is hooked, Fast Track gains up to 3 tokens. Upon getting a great skill check on a generator, all tokens are used and an additional 1% progression is made for each token on that generator's completion. Yun-Jin's second perk is Smash Hit. When your rival makes a mistake, Yun-Jin seizes the opportunity. After stunning the killer with a pallet, she breaks into a sprint at 150% of her normal running speed for a maximum of 4 seconds. Afterwards, Yun-Jin will suffer from the exhausted status for a short duration. Yun-Jin's final perk is Self-Preservation. Life is unforgiving. The more you get that, the more prepared you become. Whenever another survivor is hit with a basic or special attack within 12 meters of her, Self-preservation activates, and the following occurs. She will not leave any scratch marks. If injured, grunts of pain are reduced by 100%, and bleeding is also suppressed for the next 6 to 10 seconds. Yun-Jin is out for number 1. Make no mistake about that. But she's also out to get revenge on the man who ruined her life. If she can do that by robbing him of any victims that might come across his path, all the better.